At exactly 15 minutes past 8 in the morning of August 6th, 1945, the moment the atomic bomb flashed over Hiroshima, I was in my underwear. I still wonder to this day why I lived when so many others died. My name at that time was Father Wilhelm Kleinsorger of the Society of Jesus. I was in a frail condition as I had been suffering for 2 days from a rather painful diarrhea. I was also feeling the strain of being a foreigner in an increasingly xenophobic Japan. Even a German, since the defeat of the fatherland, was unpopular. So, the morning the bomb is dropped, I wake up about 6, and half an hour later I'm reading Mass in the chapel. During the prayers of Thanksgiving, the siren sounds. So we retire to the mission house, but then, when at 8 o'clock we hear the all clear, I go up to my room on the top floor, take off all my clothes except my underwear, stretch out on my right side on my cot, and begin reading a Jesuit magazine, Stimmen der Zeit. Minutes later, there is a terrible flash. I have time for only one thought. A bomb has fallen directly on us. Then, for a few seconds or minutes, I go out of my mind. I've no idea how I get out of the house. The next things I am conscious of are that I am wandering around in my underwear in the mission's vegetable garden, bleeding from small cuts along my left flank, that all the buildings round about have fallen down, except the mission house, that the day has turned dark, and that our housekeeper, Mrs. Murata, is nearby, crying over and over, "Shu, Jesus, our Lord Jesus, have pity on us." In the darkness, I can make out Father Superior LaSalle coming around the corner of the building. His body, especially his back, is bloody. The flash made him twist away from the window, and tiny pieces of glass had flown at him. Just then, our 2 other priests appear. Father Cieslik, who is unhurt, supporting Father Schiffer, who is covered in blood, spurting from a cut above his left ear. We tell Father Cieslik to take him to Dr. Canada before he bleeds to death. And so the 2 men set off up the street. As a public bath next door to the mission house is now on fire, I go back inside to fetch some things I want to save. When I reach my room, I find it in a state of weird and illogical confusion. A first aid kit is hanging undisturbed on a hook on the wall, but my clothes, which had been on other hooks nearby, are nowhere to be seen. My desk is in splinters all over the room, but a mere papier-mâché suitcase, which I'd hidden under the desk, is standing, handle side up, without a scratch on it, in the doorway of the room, where I cannot fail to see it. I later come to regard this as a piece of providential interference, because that suitcase contained my prayer book, the account books for the whole diocese, and a considerable amount of money belonging to the mission for which I was responsible. So, I run out of the house and put the suitcase in the mission air raid shelter, just as Father Cieslik and Father Schiffer, who is still spurting blood, come back, saying that Dr. Canada's house is in ruins, and that fire blocks them from reaching Dr. Fuji's private hospital on the bank of the river. So I try to stem Father Schiffer's spurting gut as well as I can with some bandage which Dr. Fuji gave us a few days before. I run inside to find some clothes to put on, and when I come back out, the houses all around are now burning, and the wind is blowing hard. Look, I say to everybody, we must get away or we will all die. Just then, somebody points out Mr. Fukai, the secretary of our diocese, standing in his window on the second floor, facing in the direction of the explosion, weeping. I run back inside and scramble up the stairs, which are covered with plaster and debris, and call out to Mr. Fukai from the doorway of his room. He slowly turns around and with a strange expression says, "Leave me here." I go and grab him by the collar of his coat, saying, "Come with me or you'll die." I begin to shove and haul him out of the room. Then the theological student who is staying with us comes up, grabs Mr. Fukai's feet, I take his shoulders, and together we carry him downstairs and outdoors while he cries, "Leave me! Leave me here to die!" I fetch my suitcase with the money in it and then take up Mr. Fukai pickaback. And we all start out for the East Parade Ground, which had been designated our district's safe area. Mr. Fukai, like a child now, is beating on my shoulders, saying, "I won't leave! I won't leave!" I turn to Father Lassalle and say, "We have lost all our possessions, but not our sense of humor." The street is cluttered with parts of houses that have slid into it, and with fallen telephone poles and wires. From every second or third house, we hear the voices of people buried and abandoned, who shout out with Japanese formal politeness, "Tasukete kure!" Help, if you please. We recognize several of these houses as the homes of friends, but because of the fire, it is too late to help. All the way, Mr. Fukai is whimpering, "Let me stay, let me stay." At Sakai Bridge, which would take us across to the East Parade Ground, we see that the whole community on the opposite side of the river is a sheet of fire. We dare not cross, and so decide to take refuge in Asano Park off to our left. Because I'm feeling weak due to my diarrhea, I begin to stagger under my protesting burden. And as I try to climb up over the wreckage of several houses that are blocking our way to the park, I stumble, dropping Mr. Fukai, and I plunge down, head over heels, all the way to the river. When I pick myself up, I see Mr. Fukai running away. "Stop him!" I shout to some soldiers who are standing by the bridge. As I climb back to get him, Father Lassalle calls out, "Hurry! Don't waste time!" So I ask the soldiers if they would take care of Mr. Fukai. But he gets away from them. And the last we see of Mr. Fukai, he is running back towards the fire. People are pouring into it and continue to do so all day long. The park was far enough away from the explosion that its bamboos, pines, laurel and maples are still alive. And so this green place proves very inviting for refugees. We walk farther along the river and settle down in some underbrush, where Father LaSalle lies down and goes straight to sleep. The silence in that bamboo grove by the river, where there are hundreds of gruesomely wounded suffering together, is one of the most dreadful phenomena of my whole experience. The ones who are injured are quiet. No one weeps, much less screams in pain. No one complains. None of the many who die do so noisily. Not even the children cry. Very few people even speak. When I give water to some whose faces have been almost blotted out by flash burns, they take their share, then raise themselves a little and bow to me in thanks. The Reverend Tanimoto, a friend of ours, is also in the park and greets us. He is looking for a boat in which he might carry some of the most severely injured across the river away from the spreading fire. He finds a good-sized pleasure punt on the bank and can pack 10 or 12 into the boat for each crossing. But there are no oars, only a thick bamboo pole with which to punt. Consequently, each trip takes a very long time. Then, early in the afternoon, fire sweeps into the woods of Asano Park, and a great number of people move towards the riverside. When Reverend Tanimoto sees the fire, he shouts, "All the young men who are not badly hurt, come with me!" So we move Father Schiffer and Father LaSalle close to the edge of the river. Then I join the volunteers. Reverend Tanimoto sends some to look for buckets and basins and tells the rest of us to beat the burning underbrush with our clothes. When the utensils arrive, he forms a bucket chain from one of the pools in the rock gardens. We fight the fire in the park for more than 2 hours and gradually defeat the flames. But as we are working, the frightened people in the park press closer and closer to the river, which forces some of the unfortunates who are on the very bank into the water. Numbers of these are drowned. When I get back after fighting the fire, Father Schiffer is still bleeding and terribly pale. Some Japanese are standing around, staring at him. He whispers to me with a weak smile, "It is as if I am already dead." "Not yet," I say to him, and I bind more bandage around his head, move him to a steep place, settle him so that his head is high, and soon the bleeding diminishes. About this time, we hear the roar of approaching planes, and a great number of people, even badly burned ones, crawl into the bushes and stay there until the hum, evidently of American reconnaissance planes, dies away. Then it begins to rain. The drops grow abnormally large, and someone shouts, "The Americans are dropping gasoline! They are going to set fire to us!" But the drops are palpably water, and as they fall, the wind grows stronger and stronger, and suddenly a whirlwind rips through the park. Huge trees come crashing down. Small ones are uprooted and fly into the air. Higher up, a wild array of things is revolving in the twisting funnel of the whirlwind. Papers, doors, strips of matting, pieces of iron roofing. I put a piece of cloth over Father Schiffer's eyes, so the poor man will not think he is going crazy. After the storm is over, Reverend Tanimoto begins ferrying people again. I say to our theological student, go across with him. Make your way out to the Jesuit novitiate, about 3 miles from the center of town, and request the priests there to come with help for Father Schiffer and LaSalle. Later, when Reverend Tanimoto comes ashore for a while, he hears people begging for food. Consulting with me, we decide to go back into town to get some rice from his neighborhood association shelter and from our mission shelter. Father Cieslik and 2 or 3 others come with us. The asphalt of the streets is so soft and hot from the fires that walking is not comfortable. We encounter just one person, a woman, who says to us as we pass, "My husband is in those ashes." When we reach the mission house, Reverend Tanimoto leaves us and carries on to his shelter. I am dismayed to see that our building has been razed to the ground. But in the garden, I notice a pumpkin roasted on the vine. Father Cieslik and I taste it. And it's good. We are surprised at our hunger, and we eat up quite a bit. We get out several bags of rice from the mission shelter, gather up several other cooked pumpkins, and dig up some potatoes that have been nicely baked under the ground, and then we start back. In the park, Reverend Tanimoto, who has brought some utensils with him, organizes the lightly wounded women of his neighborhood to cook. Altogether, the rice is enough to feed nearly 100 people. Then, early in the evening, we see a Japanese naval launch moving slowly up the river. It stops opposite the park. A young officer stands up in the launch and shouts through a megaphone, "Be patient! A naval hospital ship is coming to take care of you." This promise of medical help cheers the people in the park tremendously. The families settle down for the night with the assurance that a doctor will be coming. Reverend Tanimoto resumes ferrying the wounded across the river, while I lie down, say the Lord's Prayer and a Hail Mary to myself before falling fast asleep. But no sooner have I dropped off than I am being shaken by Mrs. Morata, our conscientious mission housekeeper, who is asking me, "Father Kleinsorge, did you remember to repeat your evening prayers?" "Of course I did," I answer her rather grumpily, and try to go back to sleep. But find I can't now. It would seem this is just what Mrs. Morata wants. She begins chatting to me, despite my obviously being exhausted. She wants to know when I think the priests from the novitiate will arrive to evacuate Fathers Schiffer and LaSalle. In fact, a group of them reach us not long after this, bringing with them wine and strong tea and 2 wooden litters they have hastily made out of poles and boards. So, first, we put Father Schiffer onto one of the stretchers, lower it into Reverend Tanimoto's boat, and 2 of the other priests get on board alongside. Reverend Tanimoto then poles the punt upstream to where he can find a clear roadway for them. Then he returns. He excitedly asks the rest of us to help him rescue 2 children he's seen standing up to their shoulders in the river. So a group goes out and picks them up. 2 young girls who have lost their family and are both badly burned. The priests stretch them out on the ground next to me and then put Father LaSalle aboard the punt. Father Seaslick goes with them, but I'm feeling too weak. So I decide to wait in the park until the next day. It's a hot night, and it seems even hotter because of the fires against the sky. But the younger of the 2 girls who were rescued from the river complains that she is cold. I cover her with my jacket. She and her older sister had been in the salt water of the river for 2 hours before being rescued. The younger one has huge, raw flash burns on her body. The salt water must have been excruciatingly painful to her. Now she begins to shiver heavily and again says that she feels cold. So I borrow a blanket from someone nearby and wrap her up. But she shakes more and more, saying again, "I'm so cold." And then suddenly she stops shivering and is dead. The promised naval hospital ship has not come. And Reverend Tanimoto later has a moment of blind, murderous rage at the crew of the ship, and then at all doctors crying, "Why don't they come to help these people?" The next morning, August 7th, it is again hot, and there are now a number of bodies floating in the river. The first thing I do is go and fetch water for the wounded in a bottle and a teapot I have borrowed from someone. I've heard that it's possible to get fresh tap water outside the park. Going through the rock gardens, I have to climb over and crawl under the trunks of fallen pine trees, brought down by the whirlwind. I realize I'm feeling very weak. There are many dead in the gardens. At a beautiful moon bridge, I pass a naked woman, still alive, who seems to have been burnt from head to toe and is red all over. Near the entrance to the park, there is an army doctor working, but the only medicine he has is iodine, which he is painting over cuts, bruises, slimy burns, everything. Outside the park, I find a faucet that is still working, a part of the plumbing of a vanished house. So I fill my vessels and return. When I have given the water to the wounded, I make a second trip. This time, the woman by the moon bridge is dead. On my way back with the water, I get lost. And as I look for my way through the woods, I hear a voice asking from the underbrush, "Have you anything to drink?" I see a uniform. Thinking there is just one soldier, I approach with the water, but when I penetrate the bushes, I see there are about 20 men, and that they are all in the same nightmarish state. Their faces have been wholly burned. Their eye sockets are hollow, and the fluid from their melted eyes has run down their cheeks. Their mouths are mere swollen, pus-covered wounds, which they cannot bear to stretch enough to admit the spout of the teapot. So, I get a large piece of grass and draw out the stem so as to make a straw, and give them all water to drink that way. One of them says, "I can't see anything." I answer, as cheerfully as I can, "There's a doctor at the entrance to the park. He's busy now, but he will come soon and fix your eyes, I hope." I fill the containers with water a third time and go back to the riverbank. I'm feeling very thirsty myself in the dreadful heat, but I'm too tired to go for water again. A little before noon, I see a Japanese woman handing something out. Soon, she comes to me and says in a kindly voice, "These are tea leaves. Chew them, young man, and you won't feel so thirsty." For weeks, I have been feeling oppressed by the hatred of foreigners that the Japanese have increasingly been showing. I've been uneasy even with my Japanese friends. But this stranger's gesture and gentleness towards me makes me suddenly want to cry. Around noon, the priests from the novitiate come back with a handcart. So we pack my suitcase and the things belonging to Mrs. Murata into the cart and prepare to start out. But one of the priests remembers that if we have suffered property damage at the hands of the enemy, we can enter a claim for compensation with the prefectural police. So, as the others set off with a handcart, I trudge to a police station on the outskirts, fill out the claim form, then start walking back through the center of town on my way to the novitiate. It is now that I realize the true extent of the damage. I walk through mile after mile of reddish-brown scar, where nearly everything has been buffeted down and burned. Range after range of collapsed city blocks. The few standing, gutted buildings only accentuating the horizontality of everything else. And in the streets, a macabre traffic, hundreds of crumpled bicycles, shells of streetcars and automobiles, all halted in mid-motion. Even after all that I have seen in the park, my breath is taken away. By the time I reach the novitiate, I am sick with exhaustion and fall into bed. The next thing I am aware of is a sudden flood of light pouring in on me, which brings me leaping out of bed, braced for a new concussion. When I realize what has happened, that someone has entered the room in the morning, reached up to the hanging light bulb and switched it on, I laugh, somewhat confused, and go back to bed. I stay there all day. The following morning, August 9th, at 2 minutes after 11 o'clock, a second atomic bomb is dropped on Nagasaki. 6 days later, at noon on August 15th, the Emperor Hirohito speaks for the first time in history over the radio, and the Japanese people weep. The war is over. On August 18th, 12 days after the first bomb burst, I set out on foot with my papier-mâché suitcase in my hand, carrying the money belonging to the Society of Jesus to the Hiroshima branch of the Yokohama Bank, already reopened in its half-ruined building. On the whole, I'm feeling quite well this morning. It is true that the minor cuts I received in the blast have still not healed, but I have rested well for a week, and I consider that I am again ready for hard work. By now, I am accustomed to the terrible scene through which I walk on my way into the city. The whole way, I am oppressed by the thought that all the damage I see was done in one instant by one bomb. By the time I reach the bank, the day has become very hot. I deposit the money, then start back to the novitiate. About halfway there, I begin to have peculiar sensations. The now empty suitcase suddenly seems terribly heavy. My knees grow weak. I feel excruciatingly tired. Only with a considerable expenditure of spirit do I manage to reach the novitiate. A couple of days later, while attempting to say Mass, I have an onset of faintness. And even after 3 attempts, I am unable to go through with the service. Next morning, the rector, who each day has been examining my apparently negligible but unhealed cuts, asks me in surprise, "What have you done to your wounds?" they have suddenly opened wider and are swollen and inflamed. We do not realize it at the time, but I, like so many others, was coming down with a strange, capricious disease which later came to be known as radiation sickness. By early September, as I am getting worse, my colleagues decide to send me to the Catholic International Hospital in Tokyo. By the time I arrive, I am terribly pale and very shaky. My white blood count is only 3,000. 5 to 7,000 is normal. I'm seriously anemic. My temperature is 104. I complain that the bomb has upset my digestion and given me abdominal pains. But the doctor who comes to see me is most encouraging. You'll be out of here in 2 weeks, he tells me. I learn later, though, that out in the corridor, he told the Mother Superior, he'll die. All these bomb people die. You will see. But I confound both of his predictions. I neither die nor get up in a fortnight. My fever and digestive troubles clear up fairly quickly. My white blood count goes up. And as soon as I begin to feel well, I enjoy myself tremendously. In Tokyo, I am something of a curiosity. American army doctors come by the dozen to observe me. Japanese experts question me. A newspaper interviews me. And one day, the confused doctor comes, shakes his head and says, "Baffling cases, these atomic bomb people." I am discharged on December 19th and take the train home. And as soon as I am back, I am out every day on foot, calling on Japanese Catholics and prospective converts. I read an article in the paper warning atomic bomb survivors against working too hard. But what can I do? By August of the following year, I am worn out. And almost exactly on the anniversary of the bombing, I am back in the hospital in Tokyo for the second time, suffering from fever, diarrhea, the wounds that still will not heal, wildly fluctuating blood counts, and utter exhaustion. But after I am discharged, I return to Hiroshima and continue my pastoral duties. Mine may seem a life of misery, but one has to just carry on. Besides conducting Mass, hearing confessions, teaching Bible classes, and running retreats for sisters of the convent, I visit bomb survivors, hibakusha, who are sick and wounded. I sometimes babysit for young mothers, and I go as often as I can to a sanatorium, an hour by train from the city, to comfort the tubercular patients. My fellow priests feel that I have taken on the Japanese spirit of Enryo, which means setting the self apart and putting the wishes of others first. They are concerned that I am too rücksichtsvoll, too regardful. The housekeeper told them she had seen me after I'd been out all day, collapsed on the steps of the rectory, with my head in my hands, looking like a figure of utter defeat. They are concerned that I might literally kill myself with kindness to others. When my various symptoms grow so bad that I have to be hospitalized yet again. This time it is in the Hiroshima Red Cross Hospital, and it is for an entire year's stay. After I am discharged, I am put on drugs to ward off a coronary attack and drugs for hypertension. The doctors inject steroids in my painful joints. I'm given hormones and an anti-diabetic drug. I say to my new housekeeper, Yoshiki-san, I don't take medicines, I eat them. Finally, in 1961, I am put out to pasture, so to speak, by the diocese in a tiny church in a country village where I try to be as inconspicuous as I can, sometimes wearing Japanese clothes. Once each week, I take the train and go to the Red Cross Hospital for a checkup. And at Hiroshima Station, I pick up what I love best to read as I travel. A timetable with schedules of trains going all over Honshu Island. One late spring day, sparrows alight in the tree outside my office window. I clap my hands to drive them away, and soon there appear on my palms purple spots of the sort all hibakusha dread. The doctors in Hiroshima shake their heads. The blood tests do not suggest leukemia. But I also have slight hemorrhages in my urinary tract. I think to myself, what if I get blood in my brains? All through this time of decline, a stream of visitors comes to see me, thanking me for all I have done for them in the past. One woman brings me open-faced sandwiches on German rye bread, which I love. One of my German colleagues, Father Bertzikofer, comes for days at a time, and we talk and we drink a great deal of gin. Which I have also come to love. One winter's day, at the beginning of 1976, I slip and fall on the steep, icy path down to town, fracturing 2 vertebrae, and from here on, I am bedridden. My housekeeper, Yoshiki-san, feeds me, changes the diapers she has made for me, cleans my body, and puts up with my sometimes cranky temper. In my growing helplessness, she seems to be part daughter, part mother to me. For reading, I have 2 books, the Bible and the train timetables. The only two sorts of texts, I say to Yoshiki-san, that never tell lies. I am able to inform her what train to take where, the price of food in the dining car, and how to change trains at such and such a station in order to save 300 yen. One day, I shout to her, "Come, quickly!" "What is it?" she asks. "I have found an error in the timetable." So, it is only the Bible that tells the truth. When I weaken more, my fellow priests move me here, to this two-room house just below the novitiate. Yoshiki-san now insists she sleep in my room with me. "No," I say to her, "my vows will not permit that." But she says the Father Superior has ordered it. Whether or not she is telling the truth, I am greatly relieved. And so I allow it. There is something important I have forgotten. Father Bertzikofer jokingly said once that I so loved the Japanese and their ways that I was married to Japan. Well, in 1948, 3 years after the bomb, I read that a new law on naturalization had been passed by the Japanese Diet, involving various requirements. So I hastened to submit proofs that I met all these requirements, and after some months of review, I was accepted. I then registered myself as a Japanese citizen under the name I would henceforth bear, Father Makoto Takakura. Goseichou arigatou gozaimashita. Thank you for listening quietly. And now, if you will forgive me, I must sleep.